My wife cheated on me with her boss after I built her a perfect life, lied about ending it, and when I finally decided to leave. I never thought I'd be the guy sharing a story like this, but here I am. My name's Jack. I'm 36, and I live in a quiet suburb in North Carolina with my wife, Ashley. We've been married for almost 10 years, and we have two amazing kids, Ellie 8 and Jake 5. On the surface, we seemed like the perfect family. We had a comfortable home, went on vacations, and attended all the local neighborhood events. People would say we were couple goals, but somewhere along the line, everything started to unravel. It all began with subtle changes. Ashley, who used to be incredibly warm and attentive, slowly became distant. She was always on her phone, texting away with a smile that wasn't meant for me. She started going out with her friends more, and when I asked, she'd say it was just a way to de-stress from work. I wanted to believe her, because why wouldn't I? We had a decade of history, a life we built together, and she had never given me a reason to doubt her. But something felt off. The way she laughed at her screen, or how she'd suddenly become defensive when I asked who she was chatting with, it didn't sit right. At first, I convinced myself I was just imagining things. Who wants to admit that their spouse might be lying? But over time, those doubts grew gnawing at me, until I knew I had to do something. What I didn't realize was just how far things had gone, and how much my life was about to change. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, completely by accident. Ashley had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to get ready for another girls' night out. I wasn't planning to snoop, but a message notification caught my eye. It was from someone named D. All it said was, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss your touch." My heart dropped. I picked up the phone, hands shaking, and opened the thread. There were dozens of messages between Ashley and this D. Most were mundane, talking about meeting up or sharing inside jokes. But then there were others, much more intimate ones. They talked about secret dates, how they'd sneak in time together while I was at work, and even discuss plans for an upcoming weekend getaway. And it wasn't just words. There were pictures, too. Selfies of them at some fancy restaurant, a shot of Ashley leaning against a car I didn't recognize, and one of them on a bed that definitely wasn't ours. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the screen. Was this real? It felt like a bad dream, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, not mine. But it was my wife, the woman I had promised to love forever, making plans with another man right under my nose. I scrolled further, desperately hoping it was all some sort of joke or misunderstanding. But the messages went back months. Just then, I heard Ashley's footsteps coming down the stairs. I panicked, locking the phone and putting it back exactly where she'd left it. She walked into the kitchen, all dressed up, smelling of the perfume she only wore on special occasions. She looked at me, completely unaware that everything had changed in that one moment. "Hey, honey, what's for dinner?" she asked casually, like she hadn't been lying to my face for months. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I'm not sure yet," I managed to say, feeling the weight of what I'd just discovered pressing down on my chest. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. I needed to think, to process. So I pretended everything was fine, but inside I was shattered. Who was this man? How long had they been together? And why? Why would she do this to me, to our family? I had no answers, just a whirlpool of questions spinning in my mind as I watched her leave for her night out. The door closed, and I sat down at the kitchen table, my whole world crashing down around me. The days that followed were a blur. I started noticing all the things I'd ignored before. Ashley's phone was always with her, either tucked away in her pocket or face down on the table. She had new clothes I'd never seen her buy, outfits that looked more like something a 20-something would wear, not a mother of two. She was constantly finding reasons to go out, errands that took hours, or sudden late-night work emergencies. I needed answers, so I decided to gather evidence quietly. First, I checked our shared bank statements. There were charges for restaurants I'd never been to, a hotel booking in a city 3 hours away, and even a florist purchase. She never brought home flowers, so who were they for? I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together every clue, every discrepancy. I knew I needed more concrete proof. I installed a small GPS tracker on her car. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed to know where she was really going. I also got a voice-activated recorder and slipped it under the driver's seat. I told myself it was just for confirmation that I wasn't crazy, but part of me feared what I might find. That week was torture. Every evening, Ashley would come home, kiss me on the cheek, and ask about my day. I'd ask her casually how hers was, and she'd answer without missing a beat, lying so effortlessly that it made me doubt everything. Every time she smiled at me, it felt like she was twisting a knife deeper into my heart. Finally, the weekend came. She told me she was meeting her best friend, Stacy, for a spa day. I wished her a good time, playing the supportive husband, and watched her drive away. The moment she was out of sight, I grabbed my laptop and logged into the tracker. Her car wasn't heading toward the spa. It was moving in the opposite direction, straight toward a hotel downtown. I clenched my fists, a surge of anger rushing through me. It was happening. Right now, she was on her way to meet him. My phone buzzed, an alert from the voice recorder app. I tapped on it and listened as Ashley's voice came through, light and playful. "I'm almost there, babe. Can't wait to spend the day with you." Then a male voice I didn't recognize answered, "I'm counting down the minutes. This time, let's make it extra special." I slammed my laptop shut, feeling like I was going to explode. There was no denying it now. She was cheating on me. I stood there, shaking, trying to decide what to do next. Should I go there and confront them? Or should I wait until she comes home and pretend I don't know? Either way, the truth was out, and I could never look at her the same way again. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Every time I looked at Ashley, it felt like a war was raging inside me. So that evening, when she got back home from her so-called spa day, I decided it was time. She walked in, all smiles and carrying a shopping bag. "Got a little something for myself," she said, holding up a dress. "Looks nice," I said flatly. My voice must have sounded off because she glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" she asked, her smile faltering a little. I took a deep breath. "We need to talk." Her smile vanished completely. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see the nervousness flicker in her eyes. "I know, Ashley," I said quietly. "I know about you and him." Her face drained of color. For a moment, she just stared at me, mouth slightly open, like she didn't know what to say. Then she started shaking her head. "What are you talking about? There's no him. You're being ridiculous, Jack." I felt anger bubble up. "Stop lying, Ashley. I've seen the messages. I know about the hotel. I know about everything." She opened her mouth, probably to deny it again, but then she shut it and looked away. There was a long silence, and I thought I might explode from the tension. Finally, she sighed. "Fine. Yes, there's someone else, but it's not what you think." My chest tightened. "Then what is it, Ashley? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for months." Her eyes flashed with anger. "It's your fault," she shot back, voice rising. "You've been distant. All you do is work and come home tired. You barely look at me anymore. So, yeah, I found someone who actually does pay attention to me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, instead of talking to me, you just decided to start sneaking around behind my back?" She crossed her arms defensively. "It's not that simple. I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. And I didn't want to hurt you." "Too late for that," I muttered, my voice trembling. So, what now? Do you want to be with him instead of me? She looked down at the floor, silent for a long time. I don't know, she whispered. Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. All these years, the life we'd built, and now she didn't even know if she wanted to stay. I felt like I didn't know the woman standing in front of me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep it together. Well, you'd better figure it out, Ashley, because I'm not going to keep living like this. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. After our confrontation, Ashley became distant, more so than ever. For days, we barely exchanged words beyond what was necessary for the kids. It was like she was avoiding any real conversation, as if by not speaking, she could pretend nothing had changed. But everything had. The house felt suffocating, and I couldn't bear another night lying beside her, wondering what she was thinking or who she was thinking about. So one evening, I decided to set things straight. I waited until the kids were asleep, then walked into the living room where she was sitting, staring blankly at the TV. I turned it off, the sudden silence making her look up at me, startled. We need to decide what we're going to do, I said firmly. She blinked, as if she hadn't expected me to bring it up again. What do you mean? I mean us, Ashley, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. Are we going to try to work on this, or are we going to end it? Because I can't just go on like this, pretending. She looked down at her hands, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. I told you I don't know. I need time. Time, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. How much time do you need to decide if you want this marriage? If you want us... She bit her lip, still refusing to meet my gaze. It's not that simple. You don't understand. I let out a harsh laugh. No, I don't understand. You cheated, and now you want me to just sit here while you make up your mind whether I'm still good enough for you? She flinched, and for a moment, I thought I saw guilt flash across her face. It's not like that, Jack. Then what is it like? I asked, my voice breaking. Because from where I'm standing, you've got one foot out the door, and I'm not going to wait around for you to decide whether you want to stay or go. She was silent, tears welling up in her eyes. So, what do you want me to say? I want you to choose, I said, quieter now. I want you to tell me whether you're willing to cut him out of your life and fight for this marriage, or if you're ready to walk away. The room felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I need to end things with him first. It wasn't a clear answer, but it was something. A start. I nodded slowly. Then do it. And if you can't, then that's all I need to know. Without waiting for her response, I turned and headed upstairs, the tension in my chest making it hard to breathe. It wasn't much of a victory, but at least I'd drawn a line. Now, it was up to her whether she'd cross it or leave it behind. The next few days were a blur. Ashley didn't leave the house much, and when she did, she always seemed lost in thought. I knew what she was wrestling with, and I forced myself to give her space, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream at her to hurry up and decide. I just needed to know if we still had a chance, or if she was done with us for good. One evening, as I was putting the kids to bed, she came into Jake's room and quietly asked if we could talk afterward. My stomach tightened, but I nodded. When I joined her downstairs, she was already sitting on the couch, clutching her phone like it was some kind of lifeline. Her face was pale, and I knew before she even opened her mouth that this conversation was going to change everything. I ended it, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. With him? I asked, needing the confirmation. She nodded slowly, tears pooling in her eyes. I told him it was over, for good. A heavy silence settled between us. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? For her to cut him out of our lives. But hearing her say it didn't bring the relief I expected. Instead, it just left an emptiness, a hollow ache that I couldn't quite shake. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. "Why did you decide to end it?" She wiped at her eyes, struggling to keep her composure. "Because I realized I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to lose you or the kids or what we've built together. I was selfish, Jack, and I'm so sorry." Her words hit me like a wave, knocking the breath out of me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it wasn't just fear of losing our stable life that made her end things, but a genuine desire to save our marriage. "I don't know if we can go back to the way things were," I admitted quietly. "I'm not even sure where we go from here." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I understand. I know I broke your trust, and it's going to take time. But I want to try if you're willing to give us a chance." I didn't respond right away. Could I give us a chance? Could I move past everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard? But there was one thing I knew for sure. I still loved her, despite everything. Maybe that made me a fool, but it was the truth. "I need time too," I finally said. "We can try, but I can't promise anything yet." She nodded again, tears spilling over her cheeks now. "That's all I'm asking for," she whispered. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of something that wasn't anger or betrayal. It was faint, but it was there. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild from here. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. This was only the beginning of a very long, very painful road. The weeks that followed felt surreal. We were living in the same house, sharing the same space, but it was like we were two strangers trying to figure out how to coexist. Ashley did everything she could to show she was committed. She deleted all her social media accounts, changed her phone number, and even shared her location with me at all times. She started cooking my favorite meals again, planning little outings for us and the kids, and making sure she was home every evening. It was like she was trying to turn back time, to pretend none of it had ever happened. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to fully trust her. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was truly done with him. Was this real? Or was she just biding her time until she could slip back into that other life? Every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but see the version of her that had laughed and shared secrets with someone else. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Ashley sat down beside me on the couch. "Jack," she said softly, hesitating, "I know you're trying, and I'm grateful, but I can feel you pulling away." I didn't respond immediately. What was I supposed to say? That I was scared to let my guard down again? That every time she touched me, I flinched because I remembered those texts, those photos? She reached out, tentatively placing her hand on mine. "Do you still love me?" she asked, voice breaking. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to pull my hand away. "I do," I admitted, "but I don't know if love is enough. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly, her hand slipping away. "I understand. I'm doing everything I can to fix this, Jack. I know I can't erase what I did, but I'm trying. I just want to know if we even have a chance." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in ages. She seemed so small, so fragile, like she was about to break. I felt a wave of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite name. "I'm here, aren't I?" I said quietly. "That's got to count for something." She nodded again, a shaky smile forming through her tears. "It does. It means everything." But even as she said it, I wondered if it was true. Was I staying because I really believed we could work through this, or was it because I didn't know how to let go? Each day, we put one foot in front of the other, doing our best to repair the damage, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were just covering up cracks in a broken foundation. For now, I decided it was enough to try. but I knew deep down that trying wouldn't be enough forever. Something had to change. Either I would find a way to forgive, or this fragile attempt at reconciliation would shatter into pieces neither of us could put back together. Despite everything I tried, we both did. We went to marriage counseling, where we sat on a sofa and talked through the betrayal, the lies, and all the pain it had caused. Ashley cried almost every session, apologizing over and over, saying how much she regretted it. I wanted to believe her, and sometimes, in those quiet moments when she seemed so broken and vulnerable, I almost did. But there were cracks, moments when doubt crept back in like an unwelcome guest. One of those moments came one Saturday afternoon. We were supposed to have a family picnic, but Ashley's phone buzzed just as we were packing up. She glanced at it quickly and said it was just an old friend from college. "I'll just be a minute," she murmured, stepping out onto the porch. I watched her through the window, my gut twisting. She was speaking softly, her back turned, and I couldn't hear what she was saying. After everything we'd been through, after she'd promised there'd be no more secrets, why did it feel like she was hiding something again? When she came back inside, I tried to push the suspicion down. "Who was that?" I asked casually, forcing a smile. She looked up, blinking like she hadn't expected me to ask. "Oh, just an old college friend, catching up." She smiled, but it looked forced. "Nothing important." I nodded slowly, letting it go. But the doubt had already settled in. After everything, I was finding it almost impossible to take her words at face value. Later that night, while she was asleep, I found myself staring at her phone, sitting on the nightstand. She'd given me the password weeks ago to show that she had nothing to hide, but I hadn't touched it until now. I picked it up, my heart pounding. I scrolled through her contacts and found the name she'd mentioned, Caitlin College. I opened the message thread, expecting some casual exchange. Instead, there were only 2 messages from today. "Long time no see," the first read. And the second, "Thanks for today. I've missed talking to you." I frowned. That didn't sound like a typical conversation with an old friend, did it? Why only 2 messages, and why had she said, "Thanks for today"? Had they met up? My hands tightened around the phone as a wave of anger and confusion hit me. Was I overreacting? Reading too much into it? After all, it could be nothing, but it could also be something. I knew I had 2 choices. I could confront her right then, let all my suspicions pour out, and risk another fight. Or I could wait, gather more information before jumping to conclusions. I hated feeling like I was snooping, but trust was fragile, and once it's broken, it's almost impossible to piece it back together. In the end, I put the phone down and slipped back under the covers, staring at the ceiling. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it wasn't. But either way, the seed of doubt had been planted. And once it starts growing, it's hard to get rid of. The next morning, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Ashley acted like everything was normal, chatting with the kids over breakfast and planning out her day. But I kept thinking about that text message. "Thanks for today." What did she mean by that? Had they met up without me knowing? I tried to focus on the family outing we had planned, a trip to the park with the kids, but my mind kept drifting back to that message thread. Finally, when we got home, I decided I needed answers. While Ashley was upstairs with Jake, I pulled out my phone and did something I never thought I'd do. I texted Stacy, Ashley's best friend. "Hey, quick question," I typed out. Ashley mentioned she was catching up with an old college friend. Do you know anything about that? I felt a pang of guilt as I hit send, but I needed to know if I was being paranoid or if there was something more going on. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Stacy had responded. She didn't say anything to me. College friend? Who? I hesitated. Stacy and Ashley were practically inseparable, and if Ashley hadn't mentioned this to her, that didn't make sense. I quickly texted back, someone named Caitlin. Apparently, they've been in touch recently. There was a long pause before Stacy responded again. Jack, Ashley doesn't have a friend named Caitlin from college. At least, not that I know of. My heart sank. What was going on? Why would she lie about something like that? I thanked Stacy and put my phone down, my mind racing. If Ashley didn't know anyone by that name, then who was this person? And why was she pretending it was just an old friend? I didn't want to believe it, but I knew I had to dig deeper. I remembered the GPS tracker I'd set up on her car during that first confrontation weeks ago. It was still active, though I hadn't checked it in a while. I opened the app on my phone and looked at the history for the day before, when Ashley had taken that mysterious call. My breath caught as I stared at the screen. Instead of going to the spa, as she'd claimed, she'd driven halfway across town to a small cafe. The tracker showed she'd stayed there for almost an hour before returning home. My mind filled in the gaps. She had met with this Caitlin in person. But who was she really? A new fear took hold as I considered the possibility that Ashley wasn't just lying about an old friend. Maybe she'd never really ended things with the other man. Maybe she had just found another way to keep the affair going, right under my nose. That evening, I couldn't stand it any longer. As we sat on the couch, the kids playing upstairs, I turned to her and asked, "Who's Caitlin?" Ashley stiffened, her smile faltering. "What do you mean?" "You said she was an old friend from college," I continued, keeping my voice calm. "But I talked to Stacy, and she's never heard of her." Ashley's face paled, and she looked away. I didn't want to tell Stacy because Caitlin's someone I met recently. She's not from college. I frowned. "So why did you lie?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I could see the panic in her eyes, and suddenly I knew Caitlin wasn't just a friend. She was a cover, a new name for whoever Ashley was seeing behind my back. Everything inside me went cold. "Is it him?" I whispered. "Is Caitlin just another way to keep seeing him?" Ashley's eyes welled up with tears, and she shook her head, but her silence spoke volumes. It wasn't over. She had never really ended it. I stood up, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "I can't do this again, Ashley," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "If you want him so badly, just go." She reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "Jack, please, it's not what you think." "Then tell me the truth," I demanded, "or we're done." But all she did was cry, and I knew I'd heard enough. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, the door closing behind me like a final, echoing goodbye. I couldn't just leave things hanging like that. Every instinct screamed that there was more to the story. Who was Caitlin? Why had Ashley been so evasive? I needed to know the truth, and I wasn't going to get it from her. So the next day, while Ashley was at work and the kids were at school, I decided to dig deeper. I logged into her email, something I hadn't done in years. The password was still the same, and I hated that it was so easy. I searched for anything that could explain what was going on. It didn't take long before I stumbled across an archived folder titled Old Contacts. At first, it seemed innocent, mostly emails from former coworkers and school friends, but then I found one that made my heart stop. It was from a few months ago with the subject line, let's be careful. I clicked on it, and there it was, a long thread of messages between Ashley and someone named David. My blood ran cold. The name sounded familiar, and then it hit me, the person who had sent that first text message I'd seen. He was back. I started reading through the thread. Their conversation was cautious, but filled with hidden meanings. They talked about meeting up under the radar, being careful not to leave any traces, and using different names when communicating. That's when I realized Caitlin was just a decoy, a fake name they used whenever they were worried about being discovered. Every message was another stab in the back, another proof that she'd never truly let him go. My hands shook as I continued scrolling. There were pictures, too. Casual photos of them together at places I didn't recognize. A park, a bar, That same cafe where the GPS tracker had pinged just the other day. The worst part, each picture had a timestamp, and one of them was just last week. She'd met with him again, right after telling me she'd ended it. I stared at the screen, my anger slowly turning to a cold, numbing sadness. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment. She had actively chosen to keep seeing him, lying to my face every single day. The front door opened suddenly, and I jumped, nearly dropping my phone. Ashley walked in, surprised to see me home so early. "Jack, what are you doing here?" she asked, a forced smile on her face. I looked at her, feeling strangely calm despite the storm raging inside me. "I know everything," I said quietly, "about you and David, about Caitlin, about how you never really stopped seeing him." Her face went as white as a sheet, and she stumbled back a step. "W, what are you talking about?" she stammered. "Don't." I cut her off, holding up my phone with the email thread pulled up. "I read it all, Ashley. Every lie, every meeting, every time you looked me in the eye and told me you were done with him. You were lying." Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head, as if that could make it all disappear. "Jack, I'm so sorry. Stop," I said, my voice firm. "Just stop. I don't want to hear another excuse. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed truly speechless. I felt hollow, like I'd given everything I had, and now there was nothing left. "I'm done," I said softly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "I'm filing for divorce. I can't keep doing this, living in a web of lies and half-truths. I deserve better, and so do our kids." Ashley's shoulders slumped, and she started to sob, but it didn't move me this time. I'd shed enough tears for both of us. Without another word, I turned and walked past her, grabbing my keys and heading out the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there, to escape from the suffocating pain and betrayal. As I got into my car, a strange sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control. Ashley had made her choice, and now I was finally making mine. After I left the house, I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind a tangled mess of emotions. I finally pulled into a parking lot of a small diner on the outskirts of town. It was quiet, almost empty, which was exactly what I needed. I walked inside, ordered a cup of coffee, and sat at a corner booth, staring blankly out the window. The enormity of what I'd just done was sinking in, ending my marriage, shattering the life I'd known for over a decade. And yet, somehow, I felt more relief than sorrow. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hesitating over a familiar name. Tom. He was my best friend, the guy who'd been through everything with me since college. I hadn't told him much about what had been happening, partly because I didn't want to hear the pity in his voice, and partly because I hadn't wanted to admit how bad things really were. But now, sitting alone in that empty diner, I needed someone to know. I needed someone to remind me I wasn't alone in this. With a deep breath, I tapped on his name and hit call. It rang a few times before Tom picked up, his voice bright and cheerful. "Hey man, what's up? Long time no talk." "Hey Tom," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You got a few minutes?" There was a slight pause, and when he spoke again, his tone was serious. "Yeah, of course. What's going on? You okay?" I told him everything, the affair, the lies, the confrontation with Ashley. He stayed silent, listening intently as I poured my heart out, my words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush to get it all out. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jack, I'm so sorry, man," Tom finally said, his voice filled with genuine sadness. "I had no idea. Why didn't you say something earlier?" "I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "I guess I thought I could handle it on my own. And part of me just didn't want it to be real, you know? Like, if I didn't say it out loud, then maybe it wasn't really happening. He sighed. I get that. But listen, you did the right thing. No one should have to go through what you've been through. If she couldn't respect you enough to be honest, then it's better this way. I know it hurts now, but you're going to get through this. Yeah, I murmured, staring into my cup of coffee. I know. It's just, I never thought I'd be here, you know? I thought we were solid. I thought we'd make it. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said gently, sometimes people aren't who we think they are. But that's not on you, Jack. You did everything you could. You stayed loyal, you forgave, you tried to make it work. That's all anyone can do. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Thanks, Tom. I just needed to hear that. Anytime, man, he replied. Listen, why don't you come stay with me for a bit, just to get out of the house and clear your head? I've got a spare room, and you're welcome as long as you need. His offer took me by surprise, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I appreciate it, but I don't want to be a burden. You're not, he insisted. Besides, you need support right now. Don't isolate yourself. Come on, pack a bag, and head over. It'll be like old times, except, you know, without all the college parties and bad decisions. I chuckled softly, the first genuine laugh I'd had in what felt like forever. All right, I'll take you up on that. Thanks, Tom. Anytime, he said warmly. I'm here for you, buddy. We'll get through this. I hung up, feeling a little lighter. Tom was right. I couldn't shut myself off from everyone. I needed to face this head on and start moving forward. For myself and for my kids. As I sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that leaving Ashley wasn't just an end. It was also the start of something new. With a renewed sense of purpose, I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and headed back home to pack a bag. It was time to start rebuilding one step at a time. And no matter how broken I felt right now, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this define me. I returned home late that evening, expecting the house to be dark and silent. But as I stepped inside, I noticed the light in the living room was still on. Ashley was there, sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of relief and fear. "Jack, we need to talk," she said softly, standing up slowly. She seemed almost fragile, like a porcelain doll that might shatter at the slightest touch. I hesitated by the doorway, my overnight bag slung over my shoulder. I'd come back to grab a few things before heading to Tom's place, but now I wasn't sure what to do. I sighed, dropping the bag on the floor. "What else is there to say, Ashley?" She took a deep breath, stepping closer. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever put into words. But please, just give me a chance to explain everything." "I don't need more explanations," I said, shaking my head. "You lied to me again and again. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" "Because I'm telling you the truth this time," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Please, Jack, just hear me out." Against my better judgment, I nodded slowly and sat down on the armchair opposite her. "Fine, go ahead. Say what you need to say." She swallowed hard, taking a few moments to gather herself. "The truth is, I didn't know how to let him go," she admitted quietly. "Even after I told you I'd ended things, I still felt this pull. I know it's wrong, but I didn't know how to shut it off. He made me feel wanted, alive, in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time." "Yeah, and what about me, Ashley?" I snapped, my voice filled with bitterness. "I guess 10 years of marriage and 2 kids just don't compare, right?" She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's not that. You have to understand, it was never about choosing him over you. It was about me, about how I felt. And that's why I'm such a mess." "You're right," I said coldly. "It was about you. Because you were selfish. You never thought about what this would do to me, to our kids." "I know," she whispered, her shoulders slumping. but I'm ready to change. I've already blocked him on everything. I've deleted every trace of him from my life. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to fix this if you'll give me one last chance. My heart twisted at her words. There was a part of me, maybe the stupid, hopeful part, that wanted to believe her. To believe that she could just snap her fingers and cut him out for good. But there was a bigger part of me that remembered the lies, the betrayal, the empty promises. How can I trust that? I asked quietly. How do I know that a few weeks from now or a few months from now, you won't be right back where you started? You don't, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I can't make you trust me, but I'm begging you, Jack, let me try. Let me prove to you that I can change. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the desperation in her eyes. But I also saw something else, a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. Maybe she really did want to change. Maybe this time she meant it. But I couldn't keep putting my heart on the line, only to get crushed every time. I can't make any promises, I said slowly, feeling the weight of my own words. But I'm willing to stay for now, for the kids' sake. And if you really want to fix this, you'll have to show me every single day that you're serious. Her eyes widened, and she nodded vigorously. I will, I swear. Whatever it takes. I just want us back. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if that was even possible anymore. We'll see, I murmured, feeling exhausted down to my bones. But you need to understand, one more lie, one more slip-up, and I'm done. No second chances. Okay, she whispered, wiping her tears. I understand. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for giving me a shot. I didn't say anything else as I stood up, picked up my bag, and headed upstairs. I wasn't ready to unpack it yet. For now, I just needed some time and space to process everything. Maybe we'd find a way to rebuild what was broken, or maybe this was just another delay before the inevitable end. Either way, I knew this was my last attempt at giving us a future. As I lay down on the guest bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or if I'd finally made the right choice. Only time would tell. Things didn't magically get better overnight. In fact, the days that followed felt like I was walking a tightrope, always one misstep away from falling into the abyss. Ashley tried to act like everything was normal, but it wasn't. How could it be? She'd wake up early to make breakfast, ask how my day was, and send me random messages throughout the day just to check in. It all seemed so desperate, so forced. But I knew she was trying. The problem was I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to shut her out, to keep punishing her for what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, wanted to hold on to see if maybe, just maybe, we could turn things around. I hated how conflicted I felt, how trapped I was between my anger and my love. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself standing in front of our bedroom door. Ashley was inside, probably waiting for me, like she did every night. I hadn't slept in our bed since everything came out. It felt wrong, like I didn't belong there anymore. But tonight, I took a deep breath and walked in. Ashley looked up from where she sat, curled up on the edge of the bed with a book in her lap. "Jack," she murmured, surprised. "I didn't think you'd come in." "Yeah, well," I muttered, shoving my hands into my pockets. "We need to talk." She set the book aside, looking nervous. "Okay, what's on your mind?" I took a seat at the foot of the bed, keeping some distance between us. "I know you're trying, Ashley, but I'm struggling here. I don't know how to move past everything." Her eyes softened with sadness, and she scooted closer, careful not to touch me. "I get that. I do. I can't imagine how hard this is for you, and I don't expect you to just forgive me and forget it all. But I need to know, are you still willing to work on this?" I looked down at my hands, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. "I'm here, aren't I? That's got to count for something." "It does," she said softly, "but you seem distant." like you're still 1 foot out the door. Because I am, I admitted quietly, my chest tightening. I want to make this work for the kids. I don't want them to lose their family. But I'm not sure I can ever look at you the same way. Her face crumpled, and she reached out, stopping just short of touching my hand. I know I messed up. I know I broke your trust in the worst way. But, Jack, I love you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you if that's what it takes. I hope you mean that, I whispered. Because I'm not going to keep going through this cycle, Ashley. If you fall back into old habits, if I even think you're lying to me again, I'm gone. She nodded frantically, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know, and I swear you won't have to worry. There's no one else. There's just you. For a moment, I almost believed her. I almost let myself hope that maybe she was telling the truth this time. But doubt still lingered, a dark shadow at the edge of my thoughts, refusing to leave. Okay, I said finally, exhaling slowly. I'll stay. But don't mistake that for trust, because we're not there yet. I'm here because of the kids and because I want to believe in the woman I married. But I need time, and I need you to be patient. I will, she promised, her voice breaking. Whatever you need, Jack. I'll wait. I'll do anything. I nodded, feeling the weight of my own decisions settle on my shoulders. We'll see, I murmured. But this is your last chance, Ashley. If we're going to rebuild, it has to be on solid ground. No more lies, no more secrets. She reached out again, her fingers trembling as she gently placed her hand on mine. I didn't pull away this time, but I didn't hold her hand either. I just sat there, staring at where our hands met, wondering if we'd ever feel whole again. Thank you, she whispered, squeezing my hand lightly. Thank you for giving us a chance. I didn't reply, just nodded again. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't trust, but it was something, a tiny step toward healing, or maybe just a truce in a war that had torn us apart. Only time would tell if we could really fix what was broken, or if we were just delaying the inevitable end. For a while, things started to improve, at least on the surface. Ashley and I talked more, not just about the kids or household stuff, but about us, what went wrong, how we ended up here. She opened up in ways I hadn't expected, admitting things she'd never said before. She told me about how lonely she'd felt, how she'd convinced herself that I didn't love her anymore. Hearing it hurt, but I could see that she was trying to be honest. And in some strange way, those conversations helped. They brought out emotions that had been buried under anger and resentment, emotions I thought I'd lost forever. There were still bad days, days where I couldn't stand being in the same room as her. But then there were moments when we'd laugh over some shared memory, or when she'd say something that reminded me of why I fell in love with her in the first place. It was confusing, feeling both pain and something almost like hope at the same time. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Ashley turned to me with a hesitant smile. I've been talking to a therapist, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it might help me sort through everything. I looked up, surprised. You have, she nodded, fiddling with the dish towel in her hands. Yeah, I figured if I'm really going to change, I need to understand why I did what I did, and I needed to talk to someone other than you about it. A strange mix of relief and admiration washed over me. This was new, a step I hadn't expected her to take. How's it going? It's hard, she admitted, a small, shaky laugh escaping her. I thought I'd just go in, talk about how I messed up, and get some quick fix, but it's not that simple. I'm learning things about myself that aren't easy to face. I took a deep breath, leaning against the counter. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I didn't want you to think I was just doing it to win you back, she said quietly. I wanted to make sure I was doing it for the right reasons. For me, not just for us. I nodded slowly, digesting her words. I'm glad you're doing it. It means a lot that you're trying to understand yourself. I know it's not easy." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Jack. I know I have a long way to go, but I just want you to know that I'm not giving up. On me or on us." Her words stirred something inside me, something that felt like the faintest glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to come out of this stronger. But I still needed to protect myself. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. I needed to see her follow through, to show that this wasn't just another empty promise. "That's good to hear," I said softly. "I'm not saying everything's fixed, but it's a start." She nodded, her smile widening a little. "I know, and I'm okay with that. I'm not expecting a miracle. I just want to do better." The rest of the evening passed quietly. There was a different energy between us, a cautious sense of progress, like we were taking tiny steps toward something more stable. As I watched her with the kids, laughing and playing a game with them, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride in her efforts. I still didn't know if we'd make it. I still had my doubts, and I knew the road ahead would be long and bumpy. But for the first time in a while, I felt like we weren't stuck in a hopeless cycle. Maybe we really were building something new, something that could withstand the cracks of our past. That night, as I lay in the guest bed, I thought about everything she'd said. It didn't erase the hurt, and it didn't magically restore my trust. But I realized something important. I wanted to see where this could go. I wanted to see if she could truly change, if we could create something stronger from the ashes of what we once had. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to hope. Months passed, and little by little, things started to shift. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping apologies that suddenly made everything okay. Instead, it was the accumulation of small, consistent actions that slowly chipped away at the walls between us. Ashley continued with therapy, attending her sessions religiously, and sometimes sharing what she was learning. She'd talk about how she was confronting her own insecurities, about how she'd let them eat away at her until she sought validation elsewhere. It was hard to listen to, but I could see she was genuinely committed to understanding herself. And for the first time, it felt like she was finally taking responsibility for her choices, without trying to place the blame elsewhere. I, too, started working on myself. I began seeing a therapist as well, something I never thought I'd do. But I realized I needed help to process everything, the anger, the betrayal, and the shattered sense of trust. It wasn't just about forgiving her. It was about figuring out how to heal and rebuild my own sense of self. We still had our ups and downs. Some days were good, almost normal, and I'd catch myself thinking that maybe we could actually make this work. Other days, I'd find myself replaying everything that had happened, all the lies and deceit, and it would make me question if I'd ever truly get over it. But through it all, one thing became clear. We were both fighting for this. For our family. For ourselves. One night, after a particularly long day, I was sitting in the living room when Ashley came in and sat beside me. She hesitated for a moment, then placed something on the table between us. It was a small, framed photo of us from our wedding day. We looked so happy, so carefree, with our entire future ahead of us. "I found this in the attic," she murmured, her voice soft and uncertain. "I know things will never be like they were back then, but I want to make new memories. Better ones. Do you think we can do that?" I stared at the photo for a long time, remembering how much hope and love we'd had that day. It felt like a lifetime ago. Slowly, I looked up at her, seeing the worry and hope mingled in her eyes. "I think it's worth a try," I said quietly. "We can't erase the past, but maybe we can build something new. Different, but stronger." Her shoulders sagged in relief, and she reached out to take my hand, her grip gentle and tentative. I didn't pull away. It was the first time we'd really touched in months, and for once, it didn't feel forced. It felt right. From that point on, things started to shift again, in a way that felt more real, more genuine. We spent more time together, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. We found new ways to connect, to talk openly about what we needed from each other. It was like rediscovering who we were as individuals and as a couple, but with a deeper understanding of our flaws and strengths. One evening, while the kids were at a sleepover, we decided to have a quiet dinner at home. It wasn't fancy, just takeout from our favorite place. But as we sat there eating and talking, something felt different, lighter. For the first time in forever, I saw a glimpse of the future that didn't look bleak or uncertain. "I know we've got a long way to go," Ashley said softly, meeting my gaze. "But I feel like we're finally getting somewhere. I'm not perfect, and I'm going to make mistakes. But I promise you, Jack, I'm never going to take us for granted again." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm. "And I'll keep working on trusting again. I'm not there yet, but I'm willing to keep trying." She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. That's all I could ask for. We didn't toast to a new beginning or make any dramatic declarations. We just sat there, enjoying each other's company, taking it one step at a time. For the first time, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster. I was looking forward, willing to see where this uncertain road might lead. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no guarantees that we'd make it. But we were both willing to keep trying, to keep showing up for each other and for our kids. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what it really took to rebuild from something so broken, to just keep choosing to try every single day. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Whether we ended up together or apart, I'd be okay. Because I'd learned that no matter how shattered things get, there's always a way to start again. And sometimes starting again was the most courageous thing you could do.